at mapagpalang umaga para po sa ating lahat. Our keynote speaker for the third day of the Coco-Kwentuhan sa Negosyo directs the marketing, research and development, and manufacturing of resins, oleochemicals, and colorants to serve a wide range of industries in DNL Industries Incorporated. He earned his bachelor's degree in business information processing from the Curtin University in Australia in 1991 and completed the advanced management program from the Harvard Business School in 2010. His company, Chemres Technologies Incorporated, established itself as a global supplier of coconut-derived oleochemicals. With the mission to promote natural and sustainable ingredients, the company supports manufacturers and brand owners of personal and home care products around the world. The company also established itself as a leading global supplier of coconut medium-chain triglyceride or MCT oil. The brand Laureen is well known to many business leaders and professionals in the country. In his capacity as chairman of the United Coconut Association of the Philippines, or UCAP, board member of the ASEAN Oleochemical Manufacturers Group, and as vice president of the Philippine Oleochemical Manufacturing Association, or POMA, he seeks to unify the various subsectors of the coconut industry into a progressive and sustainable industry, a role that involves many business sectors and government departments. As a champion of the Philippine Biodiesel Association, his advocacy for the use of biofuels has been instrumental in the successful mandate of biofuel blends in the Philippines' energy mix. With this as background and his vast experience in the industry that I have mentioned, here to provide the keynote message to today's topic on private sector and coconut farmers partnership, let us all welcome the Managing Director of Chemres Technologies Incorporated, Mr. Dean A. Jr.
Good morning, friends, and welcome to the Coco-Kwentuhan Day 3. Mariel, if you allow me to share my screen, I'll start the presentation promptly. Thank you po, Administrator Madigal. Okay, I assume everybody can see the screen. During yesterday's discussion I had with Dr. Ray Velasco, only then did I realize that there is somewhat a disconnect between the farmers and the private sector. The reason for this is the farmers have a limited interface. Normally it is with people who buy copra or fresh nuts or primary produce. Products that are manufactured or downstream sectors of the private industry, they don't get to interface very much with the farmers. And hence, there's not enough of an appreciation of what private sector does. And in some parts of the community, it is even seen that private sector seems to profit from the business while the farmers are not. So this morning's session, we plan to have a discussion. I'll set the tone, and then we'll have the discussion this later part, so that there's an appreciation from both sides, both private sector and the farmers. Here's the outline. It's a very simple outline, 4 points lamang. The challenge is we have our markets that was taken over by imported palm oil. Now, more on that later. The private sector is very instrumental and is very active in creating a new demand for coconuts assuming these are the coconut markets that were displaced because of imported palm oil. Then we will highlight some areas where we saw the collaboration between farmers, private sector, and the government. And lastly, we'd like to emphasize how that interface between farmers and private sectors could be enhanced. Now, why are we in this difficult situation with poverty and hardships at farm level? I would attest that the biggest influence has been the loss of our market to imported palm oil. If you walk to our supermarkets, the groceries, you will see a wall of golden oil in the vegetable oil section or cooking oil section. And you will struggle to find a bottle that is actually coconut oil. It's easy to find out. If you look at that inset picture, a wall of golden oils, almost none of them are coconut, because coconut are normally packed in bottles that are opaque, not clear. You cannot see through because coconut oil tends to be white, and then when it's cooler, it becomes a solid fat. So the bottles are always opaque. You don't see the inside oil. But if you see all the other oils there, non-coconut, all of them, most of them are palm oil, palm olein, then there's soya, corn, rapeseed, olive oil. Sad to say, every household and most food manufacturing companies have switched away from using coconut and now are using palm olein or refined palm oil. Why is that? We know it's all because of economics. If it's going to be your business, your cost of production is, of course, something you want to always manage to be at the minimum. Palm oil is the world's most efficient crop. It's the cheapest vegetable oil out there. And today, we import so much palm oil, it has taken over as much as 60% of what used to be served by coconut oil. So now you ask, why are we in this state of poverty or hardship? It's because we lost our market. And once you lose your market, that means we become dependent on markets outside that will set the price or the world price for the very product that we produce. How ironic. The price in Rotterdam, the price in Chicago, will determine the price of copra that we pay our farmers. It is this dependence on overseas markets that has made the predicament quite difficult for our farmers. We should be able to take back some control, but that is only possible if we are able to create a demand that wins back what we lost to oil palm. Let me just introduce to the audience the private sector. The private sector, you might know them as the plantations, the nurseries, millers and refiners, manufacturers, brand owners, and the service providers, the transport people, the logistics people, the compliance companies, all these services who make value adding possible. And there's, of course, the United Coconut Associations of the Philippines, UCAP, who represent them as an umbrella association. So you can see a lot of the companies who add value to coconut are members of the association. UCAP can be a contact point for the farmers, a contact point for planners, master planners, academe, or people who want to look into the improvement of the industry, because we do represent the bigger private sector. what role does the private sector play? First and foremost, we create value and we develop markets. And that means each private sector member, they need to invest to create value. So we start from the lowly copra that costs only, let's say, 20 pesos. It is the role of the private sector to seek out markets, to create new products, value-added products, and to market that under their brands or other people's brands so that it could be sold in markets locally and markets overseas. In doing so, we compete with the best in the world. When you're talking about an export market, we compete with BCO coming from Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and sometimes even Thailand, who's a net importer. So we need to compete with the very best in the world. That means we need to play with the very best and be better at that game. That is the challenge of the private sector. And part of that, we need to be investing in our own intellectual property. Intellectual property is needed so that you have some protection for the products you develop or the uniqueness in the products that you produce. There's value addition, and that requires investment in machinery, equipment, and whatever that would add value to coconuts. And then there's compliance with the standards. The standards there are more and more standards being imposed on a manufacturer. More standards to meet because of tightening food standards or safety standards overseas. These all require investment on the part of a manufacturer. Number 4, we are also very cognizant that consumers today will want to patronize or buy products that they see are sustainable. Sustainable products. Hindi lang mura sa kanila bibilhin. Gusto nila mura, tapos wala pang napinsala sa supply chain nila. So if you talk to a consumer in Australia, they'd like to support brands who support farming communities that put their blood and sweat into the production of these primary produce. They like to see that their support of a brand eventually cascades to the farmers who produce it. Number 5, private sector employs a lot of people. It's taken for granted, pero every time that you have manufacturing, you have investment, it involves investing in people also. To create value, people are employed. And lastly, to the interest of our government, we pay taxes. Or at least those who make profit pay taxes. Now, important again for us to note that the interface between our farmers and the private sector is somewhat limited. As mentioned earlier, the interface is usually limited to the private sector partners who buy copra, who buy fresh nuts, husk or coir. So it's usually the interface only with the primary producers. As the product is value added, as the product is processed further, our farmers have much less contact with them. So your interface is really limited only on the upstream. Also very important for us to note, the private sector is self-funded. We receive little to no support from government in terms of funds, but good to note that there are also the likes of PCA, DA, DTI, who actually helps in helping us add value and create new markets. So I'd like sectors from the farming community to appreciate what the private sector does. I'd like to take this as an example. Lauren liquid coconut oil. This is a product that was developed by ChemRes to broaden or to expand the market for virgin coconut oil. Let's start with the premise. Why did we develop such a product? We know that VCO has gained popularity, but over the last 5 years, the production of VCO, not only from the Philippines, but from Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Indonesia, they've been commoditizing the market. What does that mean? The competition has made prices for VCO lower and lower by the year. And our customers shop around. The customers would always look for the lowest cost producer. So what we wanted to do is introduce some innovation that will add value once again to coconut oil and expand the market beyond those consumers who buy VCO. This has been mentioned in previous conferences. VCO has a unique and very nice flavor. It has this fragrant coconut smell and mild coconut taste, and a lot of people like it. But there are at least 40% of the consumers who prefer to have a bland tasting oil, an oil that is flavor-free. Or it could be people who just don't agree with the smell or flavor of coconut. So we wanted to tap into that market. There's been a lot of research that said coconut oil is very, very healthy. They want to buy something healthy, but if the taste disagrees with them, they will not buy a second time. So we are trying to capture that market, and we wanted to expand the export market. Isa pa, you know that VCO, when it's in the cooler countries, as soon as the temperature drops below 23 degrees, you have a solid fat. And once it's in solid form, it's not very easy to use. So you need to always thaw it by heating it, or you use a spoon, sometimes a knife, to dig it out of the jar. Kaya nga, the garapons are what they use. They don't use a bottle that has a small spout. They use garapon with a wide mouth so that they could scoop it up. Okay, so these are the opportunities that we saw that gives us some room to innovate. So we came out with this product called liquid coconut oil. Not only does it stay liquid, it stays liquid down to 5 degrees Celsius, but it is flavor-free. And it maintains, or in fact, it builds on the health benefits that VCO has. Okay, so we now have a product. We now want to bring that product to the market, to the consumers. It's not a matter of putting the product in a bottle and sending it into a sea container and sending it overseas. It's not that simple. The facilities we need to create this unique product is a very big factory, and that's a picture of it on the lower left corner. This factory, because it's a food manufacturing plant, has to meet a lot of international standards for safety, for quality, and for care of the environment, and for care of its employees. That's the certification down there on its right-hand side, ISO 9001, 14001, and 45001. Not only that, we need to get food safety standards, kosher certification, organic certification, and halal certification. On top of that, there's FDA also, and DTI. Okay, so every certification that a factory needs costs a lot of money. Not one-off, but every year there's a renewal. There are audits. And these are standards or certifications that are being added on year after year. So there's that investment. On the customer side, if you look to the lower right-hand corner, customers would like to see a product that is organically certified. They want to try only product that is non-GMO, non-genetically modified origin. So even those need a lot of certification and qualification. To add to that, we have to also draw on support from the government. This is where the cooperation comes in. We work with the DTI EMB in trade exhibits, in trade missions, in branding, in value adding, and in business matching. There are so many interfaces we have with the DTI that has created new businesses. We work with the DOST to look for new technologies, to look for intellectual property that we can use. Once we get those, we register with the ITO, or Intellectual Property Office. We need this because this is protection for the future. We want the innovations, or we want these unique products to remain for us, not for others to copy. Then, of course, there is Philippine Coconut Authority, endlessly helping the industry. And most recently, or currently, we're in our Coconut Week, and this Coco-Kwentuhan is exactly a venue for collaboration and cooperation. So you see, to bring coconuts to the consumer market in the world, it requires a collaboration with so many parties. So our primary producers, our coconut farmers, might not see all of these activities because of their limited interface. But it's good for you to see them. And I believe there are model companies like Green Life. Green Life is of course, owned and run by the Rubio family. And this is a very good model, a very good example of a farmer who has seen the potential. They have invested time, money, effort, blood and sweat to create their brand, to bring it not only to the local market, but to create export markets for themselves. They will find out, in fact, they found out that all of these certifications and all of these expenses to compete in the world market requires a lot of investment. But they are committed and they are relatively successful in doing so. Hence the brand Green Life. We see them proudly displayed at Cultura or SM. We see them also in duty-free Philippines at the airports. So these all require a lot of work. So ito po, we wanted to let the audience appreciate that there's so much involved and so much that the private sector has to do to be able to survive and to maintain a viable business. This is another private sector-led advocacy. It's not very obvious to most people, but do you know that we already have 2% cocoa biodiesel blended into all the diesel sold in the country? This started back in 2007. It was a mandate made through the Republic Act. This was passed in one session of Congress in 2006 during the term of President Arroyo. Matatanong ninyo, one session of Congress, Republic Act, it's rare, no? It's very rare that you get a Republic Act passed in one session of Congress. Normally it takes several, in fact, it takes many years for a Republic Act to pass. But amazingly, this is a Republic Act that was passed in one session of Congress. You will ask, what happened, or what was the magic formula? It was the perfect timing. That was the time when copra prices were so low, crude coconut oil was so low, but at the same time, the price of oil was incredibly high. It was hitting $150 a barrel. It was never seen, ever. So during the term of President Arroyo, she was, of course, criticized because Philippines is an oil importing country. We needed to have a fuel that is locally produced from local feedstock. And coconut oil was the answer. It was perfect. Coconut oil had no market. The price was in the dirt. But oil that fuels all the economy is incredibly out of reach. So having a biofuel that would serve both challenges was perfect timing. And Secretary Lotilla, that was just after Secretary Vince Perez, Popo Lotilla took that initiative and pushed it with the private sector to get biodiesel enacted into a mandate under the Republic Act 9367. Now, why is it so important? For coconut oil, we have suddenly created overnight, hindi dahan-dahan, we created a value-added market for coconut oil because it requires a lot of processing. And that value-adding means it can be sold for a higher value, closer to the price of diesel fuel that time. And being diesel fuel, the volume is enormous. It's enormous. We said earlier that we lost a lot of our food market to oil palm, but we gained it back with an application in fuel. Now, what else makes this such a great Republic Act? We, number one, have displaced a portion of diesel fuel with something made from coconut. That's a direct replacement, a market overnight. Not only that, did people realize that all these smoke belchers that was populating all our city streets, didn't they just disappear? Di ba nawala yung mga nagbubuga na parang pusit? Yung mga jeepneys na bumubuga ng napakaitim na usok. Saan sila napunta? Andiyan pa rin sila, di ba? Andiyan pa rin sila. Nagbago ba sila ng makina? Nag-upgrade ba sila ng sasakyan? Hindi naman. Pero, paano nawala yung usok? It was because of the biodiesel blend that was put into the fuel. So not only that, we know that the smoke belchers create a lot of respiratory illnesses for our country people. Not only that, it's so irritating. No? So we created a market overnight. We also address air pollution. We, in fact, also improve the mileage of all these vehicles. Kung nawawala kasi yung usok kasi, yan yung hindi nasunog na krudo. Yung hindi nasunog na krudo, lumalabas sa tambucho yun as itim na usok. Kung biglang na-harness mo lahat yan, yung sayang, nagamit mo, you converted it to energy, lumalayo yung takbo ng sasakyan. The mileage improvement is significant. And during that start of the mandate, we saw that mileage improvement ranged from very, very modest 7% improvement up until 20%. The more dilapidated the vehicle, the bigger the improvement in mileage gain. Now, 2 years later in 2009, that 1% became 2%. That 2% blend in diesel consumes 130,000 tons of crude coconut oil per year. It's huge, diba? That 2% takes up more than 10% of our coconut oil supply. It's more like 14 to 15% of our coconut oil supply. We still lost a lot to oil palm. There's still a lot of value to gain back. So that's why there is a mandate for B5, or there is an advocacy to push for a B5 mandate. B5 mandate, it would bring up the consumption of coconut oil to almost it will be almost 500,000 tons of crude coconut oil per year. That's about 40 to 45% of our coconut oil supply. How does that affect the farmer? If you have a sudden demand overnight, what happens? doesn't that bring up the price of copra? Hindi ba tataas yung bentahan ng copra pag maraming bumibili, maraming naghahanap? Yan yung immediate benefit sa mga farmers natin. Hindi lang po yun. Every supply chain that's involved in the biofuels program, from the manufacturers to the distribution, to the trucking, to the oil companies, everybody gains. Again, this is the meaning of inclusive benefit. Not only does the price of copra improve, it also makes the copra price more stable because you have a big market that keeps the price stable and not influenced by Rotterdam or Chicago or New York. So you can see how important this Biofuels Act is and how important it is that the private sector is leading the advocacy with a lot of, I have to say and give credit to the PCA under Administrator Madrigal. We have so much sales pitch, sales pitch namin to. We are trying to justify, we're trying to convince fellow cabinet secretaries, cabinet members. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to let them see the real picture and the inclusive benefit. As obvious as it is to us, unfortunately, some people need more than just a presentation to see the merits of a higher mandate. So that's a very important private sector-led advocacy, and one that requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of interface. Now, we wanted to revisit that interface between farmers and the private sector. The old paradigm, o ito yung kadalasan nangyayari, yung kasanayan, a private sector company would normally buy fresh nut, copra, or primary produce, and it stops there. And a farmer's livelihood will rely very much on his productivity, his ability to produce nuts, to produce copra. It is, of course, sariling sikap, as much help as they need to improve that livelihood, they need it, because by themselves, it's a little bit difficult. Now, I mentioned again that they have very limited interface with the private sector, aside from selling to buyers of their primary produce. But there's a new paradigm, and we will hear from them later this morning. The new paradigm calls for companies who not only invest in the industry, but most companies will invest if there's a return on investment. It now goes beyond that. There are now companies who have a higher, more altruistic goal. Mas mataas yung hinahangad nila. Hindi lamang yung pagbibili, but gusto nilang tumulong. So they bring in their own corporate social responsible programs, CSR. CSR means they have to invest back into the upstream stakeholders, the farmers. But that is getting even more polished. Number 3, these CSR that benefits farmers are now also giving an ROI, or it's also returning back to the company. How is that happening? This has become a new business model. CSR can be a very good business model if you can tap into markets who appreciate that the producers, the primary producers of the product that they buy, benefit when they buy your product. So, for example, a bottle of coconut oil sold in Frankfurt, Germany. There's one bottle that is selling for 5 euros and one that sells for 7 euros. Side by side, one is more expensive, but the 7 euro product, it has an advocacy a farmer community that it supports. So when a buyer would choose a product, they would like to choose something that might be more expensive, but they know is doing a lot of good. It's an extension of their goodwill. Kumbaga, nakatulong sila dun sa mga farmer-producer ng brand na yun. So this has become a new paradigm and has become a very effective way even for us marketers to push. We are now helping communities, farmers. Our company, in fact, has put together some of our foundation workers, some of our customers to work together to bring a source of, let's say, water supply to the people of in Bicol, to some communities in Bicol. Later on, you will hear from Primex, Cargill, and Cardinal. They have their own programs. Pero itong bagong paradigm, it not only helps the farmers, but it also pays back by giving a lot of goodwill and marketing points for the private sector. So we like to see more and more of such collaboration. Ang gobyerno, syempre, we want to recognize the government. In particular, we wanted to recognize PCA. Month of August is the month when we really go all out to promote coconut, not only locally, but we wanted to reach out to our export markets. We just had our virtual exhibit, the Coco Week Virtual Expo. That is a smart way of holding an exhibition without being physically present. So people can use their computer screens to visit booths that are virtually a booth that they could walk and talk to someone and look at brochures and hopefully get new products out. Our government is also tasked with looking after their social welfare, the healthcare of our farming communities, and of course, education and training. Education and training not only for other vocations, but how to improve the efficiency and productivity of their farms. There's a lot of help also in trade policies, international trade policies. The Philippines still enjoys a lot of free trade agreements. Thank you very much to our DTI for negotiating or getting these in line. Free trade agreements allows us to export into markets, and those importing companies do not need to pay duties, sometimes not even tax. And of course, we also got the government helping us to improve our safety standards, our environmental obligations, and all our operations need to comply to a minimum standard for safety and quality. So it is a collaboration. Kapit Bisig, it is really the farmers, the government, and the private sector who has to come together. And with that, I will leave it to our dear Dr. Velasco and MC. I give it back to you. Salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you po, ladies and gentlemen, once more, setting the stage for our discussion for the day. Our keynote speaker, that is Dean Lau. Maraming salamat po.